Our story begins with a man who learned long ago that robbery is the fastest way to make money. He targeted women specifically, believing them to be slow to react, and after one such attempt, he found himself headed straight to prison for a year of hard labor because, as it turns out, he had tried to mug an undercover policewoman. A year later, Arthur was released, intending to go straight until he saw the lone $5 in his pocket. He figured he might as well try one more score. After all, prison at least offered free meals. What he didn't know was that during his year away, the world had changed completely, with ghosts and demons now haunting the streets at night. Unaware of the supernatural shift, Arthur used his last $5 to buy a broken wooden sword and set out. It was late, and after wandering the empty streets without seeing a soul, he finally spotted a figure up ahead. The figure stood perfectly still, surrounded by a faint, swirling black mist that Arthur failed to notice in the dark. Thinking only of his next meal, he gripped his broken peachwood sword and charged forward. A group of nearby exorcists watching the female ghost froze in shock, and the ghost herself was equally stunned. Arthur, looking as fierce as possible, demanded she hand over all her money or he'd drive his blade right through her. The ghost's face was deathly pale, her terrifying eyes filled with utter confusion as she realized she was being mugged. One of the hidden exorcists whispered in disbelief, wondering what kind of madman tries to rob a ghost in the middle of the night. A female exorcist nearby felt a wave of shame, noting that their entire team had been too afraid to move, yet this man had charged in alone. She assumed he must be a master, especially since this ghost carried a $10,000 bounty. They lamented losing the reward due to their own lack of courage, while the ghost herself was at a loss for words. She wondered how this man could appear so late at night and show absolutely no fear, as he boldly restrained her, which suggested he was more than capable of handling a spirit. She could feel a sharp, burning sensation where the broken peachwood sword pressed against her neck, a very real threat to her existence. After a quick analysis of the situation, the ghost decided to surrender, pleading with him not to hurt her in a voice that carried a chilling, supernatural echo. Arthur, however, was so focused on the money that he didn't notice the eerie tone. He felt a smug sense of pride, thinking her trembling was just typical female fear, and convinced himself he was a natural-born bandit. The ghost fumbled around her person and finally pulled out a stack of paper offerings, extending a pale, cold hand to pass them back to him. Arthur took the paper, but his brow furrowed in anger as he barked, asking why she was giving him funeral money. The ghost was baffled, as that was all she had. Now it was Arthur's turn to be confused, asking if she actually thought she was a ghost just because she carried funeral money. The ghost paused, wondering if he truly didn't realize what she was, before asking in a dark, menacing tone if he really didn't know she was a spirit. Suddenly, her ghostly energy erupted, sending a wave of supernatural cold through the air that made Arthur shiver. He swallowed hard, praying he hadn't actually tried to rob a ghost. Trying to keep his composure, he challenged her to prove it, stammering slightly as he spoke. In response, a sickening cracking sound echoed from the woman's neck, and without moving her body at all, her head began to spin smoothly around until she was staring him directly in the face. At that exact moment, Arthur began to feel that a life of crime was perhaps a very poor career choice. He told her that if she could actually take her head off, he'd believe her. With a ghastly grin, the ghost gripped her own head with her pale hands, lifted it off her neck, and placed it on her backside. She made a horrific face, even popping out her eyeballs and placing them into the palms of her hands. Arthur quickly told her to stop, admitting he had been convinced the moment her head spun around. Since he finally believed her, the ghost opened her massive maw to finish him off, but Arthur shouted for her to wait, claiming he had something special to show her. The ghost paused, curious, as Arthur released her neck and slowly reached for his zipper. Her eyes widened in expectation, but in the next heartbeat, a sudden stream of water hit her. The stream of water hit the ghost, and she let out a blood-curdling scream as if acid had been splashed on her face. Her head instantly detached and flew back in agony. Arthur, meanwhile, was feeling quite smug, relieved that his holy water, or rather, his status as a lifelong bachelor, actually worked against spirits. As the ghost's head tried to fly back for a counterattack, Arthur firmly pressed his broken peachwood sword against her headless neck. He warned her that while his special water might not kill her, a wooden blade through the throat certainly wouldn't feel good. The floating head froze midair, her eyes burning with rage as she demanded to know what he actually wanted. Arthur admitted that while he started the night looking for a score, he was now just trying to stay alive. The ghost, desperate to regain control, promised not to hurt him if he just let her body go. Arthur, however, wasn't born yesterday. He told her that as a former convict, he knew a trap when he heard one, and he wasn't about to let her go just so she could kill him. The ghost fell silent, mostly because he was right, but being held hostage by a common mugger was a massive blow to her supernatural ego. She asked him, with her head still bobbing in the air, what his plan was. Arthur realized that standing in the middle of the street, holding a ghost's neck wasn't exactly a long-term strategy. So, he did what any responsible citizen would do. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police. He told the operator that he had kidnapped a ghost, and that the situation had become rather awkward and stagnant. The ghost was stunned. She never imagined her captor would actually call the authorities. In this world where spirits roam the streets, specialized units exist to handle them. There are the freelancers, monks, priests, and exorcists, and then there's the official spirit police. This government department recruits practitioners specifically to deal with the various demons and monsters that plague the city. After Arthur's call, the spirit police dispatched a team immediately. Back on the street, the ghost's head was still hovering, staring at him in utter disbelief. She couldn't wrap her mind around the fact that she was being turned in to the cops. To be honest, it was a bit of a career low for her. If the spirit police caught her, she was looking at serious jail time for violating this supernatural conduct code by scaring mortals. Arthur didn't care about her legal troubles, though. He just wanted to hand her over so he could finally be out of danger. It was a simple transaction in his mind. The ghost, feeling quite indignant, pointed out the absurdity of the situation. He was the one with the sword, holding her body hostage, yet he was the one claiming to be in danger. Arthur just shrugged. He knew that the moment he let go, his life expectancy would drop to zero. He ignored her pleas and kept his grip tight, refusing to relax even for a second. He stood there, sword pressed against the headless neck, waiting for the sirens. It was a strange sight, even for this city, a man in a standoff with a floating head. No matter what the ghost said, Arthur remained unmoved. The ghost was reaching a breaking point. She was used to being the predator, not the victim of a kidnapping. Just as she was beginning to lose all hope, the authorities finally arrived on the scene. The lead captain, carrying a heavy staff covered in glowing runes, walked up and surveyed the scene. He looked at the floating head, then at Arthur holding the body, and asked for an explanation. The ghost immediately cried out, claiming she was being kidnapped. Arthur shot back instantly, arguing that he wasn't kidnapping her. He was detaining a public nuisance who was out scaring people. The ghost rolled her eyes so hard they nearly fell out, reminding him that he had literally asked her for money just minutes ago. Arthur, of course, denied everything. He scoffed at the idea, asking why he would ever want funeral money unless he was planning a trip to the underworld. He was determined to play the hero. The ghost was left speechless by his audacity, while the officers seemed much more inclined to believe the human over the spirit. A young, short-haired female officer stepped forward and scolded the ghost for trying to flip the script. She found the idea of a human mugging a ghost completely ridiculous. Arthur nodded along, though deep down, he knew exactly how ridiculous it actually was. The officer ordered the ghost to put her head back on and come with them quietly. The ghost hesitated, her eyes flashing with a final spark of defiance as she asked if they really thought they could take her. It was a bold move, considering the circumstances. However, one look at the captain's glowing staff made her reconsider. She glared at Arthur one last time before her head flew back onto her shoulders. The officers moved in with specialized spirit-binding handcuffs, and Arthur finally felt the weight lift from his chest. As they locked the ghost in the back of the van, the female officer approached Arthur with an envelope. She thanked him for his contribution to city safety and handed it over as a reward. Arthur was stunned as he opened the flap to see what was inside. It was a thick stack of bills, $10,000 to be exact. Happiness hit him like a freight train. He realized that kidnapping ghosts wasn't just legal, it was incredibly lucrative. His eyes practically turned into dollar signs as he realized he had found a new career path. He patted the cash in his pocket, his excitement beyond words. He decided right then and there that if ghosts were the key to getting rich, he was all in. And so, our reformed criminal began his journey as a supernatural bounty hunter. But first, he really needed a decent meal. We see Arthur wandering the deserted streets, wondering where on earth he can find an open restaurant at this hour. Just then, a group of exorcists who had been watching from the shadows catch up to him. Their leader, looking quite impressed, asks how he managed to take down a female ghost with nothing but a broken wooden sword. Arthur eyes them warily and asks who they are. The group introduces themselves as the Night Squad, a team of intern exorcists who hunt monsters for rewards. Their leader, a man named Leo, explains their mission. Arthur, ever the skeptic, asks why they didn't step in to help earlier if they were such professionals. Leo admits sheepishly that they aren't nearly as brave as Arthur, as that was their very first time facing a real ghost. Arthur frowns, realizing he's being treated like a veteran, even though it was technically his first time too. He puts on a stoic front, acting as if a ghost is nothing special. Leo immediately begs him to share some of his wisdom. Arthur tells them that the first rule of ghost hunting is simple: don't be afraid. After all, every ghost was once a person, and every person will eventually become a ghost. He adds that since they are doing this for the money, fear is a luxury they can't afford, because being poor is far scarier than any spirit. Leo is moved by this logic and immediately offers Arthur the position of squad leader. To be honest, he was quite desperate for a competent boss. Arthur thinks about it for exactly 1 second before refusing, mostly because he has no intention of splitting his earnings with anyone else. Meanwhile, the police van carrying the captured ghost reaches an intersection. Suddenly, a red bridal sedan, carried by 4 small spirits, rushes out from the side. The sedan slams into the police van, flipping the vehicle while remaining completely unscathed. A beautiful female ghost inside the sedan lets out a chilling laugh. She grabs a semi-conscious male officer sitting nearby, intending to take him away for a ghostly wedding ceremony. By the time the other officers crawl out of the wreckage, the red sedan and the ghost have vanished into thin air. The female officer from earlier is furious, shouting into her radio for backup. A spirit has been kidnapped, and their prisoner has escaped. It was, quite literally, a disaster. Elsewhere, Arthur is about to say goodbye to the interns, but then he changes his mind. If he's going to make a living out of this, he needs to know more about the tools of the trade. He asks them what kind of weapons are actually effective against the supernatural. Leo, thinking this is a test of their knowledge, explains that the most common weapon is a peachwood sword, specifically one from a tree that has survived for a century. If that tree was struck by lightning, the wood becomes a top-tier artifact. They also mention spirit-slaying charms and demon-subduing staves. The interns compete to list more items, like red strings and bagua mirrors. Arthur nods along, memorizing every word. He tells them their professional knowledge is fine. It's just their courage that needs work. The group is thrilled to receive praise from their idol. A female exorcist in the group asks if Arthur could give them a live demonstration or perhaps find a ghost to show them how it's done. Arthur panics internally, knowing he has no real skills and hasn't even bought any proper equipment yet. He's in a bit of a tight spot. But as luck would have it, a familiar female ghost is rapidly approaching from the distance. When she spots Arthur, she freezes in shock, and Arthur is equally surprised. He smiles at her, remarking that if this isn't fate, he doesn't know what is. The ghost, however, is just confused by his sudden confidence. Having just escaped the police, the ghost is delighted to run into Arthur again. She mocks him for his bad luck, remembering how he kidnapped her and used holy water to burn her. She's ready for revenge. Arthur simply lets out a cold laugh of his own. He tells her he's glad to see her too, as she represents a second chance for a payday. He draws his broken wooden sword, a move that leaves the ghost completely baffled. She wonders if he's forgotten that he only caught her by mistake the first time. She can't understand why he's being so proactive now that he knows she's a ghost. Perhaps he was lying all along? The truth is, money can be a much more powerful motivator than fear. If kidnapping ghosts is the path to wealth, Arthur is more than willing to walk it. As he grips his broken sword, Arthur doesn't see a terrifying spirit. He sees a walking $10,000 bill. The intern exorcists watch from the sidelines, trembling with nerves. Leo sighs in admiration, wondering when they will ever possess such an intimidating aura. The female exorcist agrees, finding Arthur's lack of fear incredibly impressive. They have officially become his biggest fans. Little do they know, their hero has no magical powers or spiritual training whatsoever. He's just a man with the heart of a bandit. Even the ghost starts to feel a bit uneasy under his intense gaze. She asks if he's really just an ordinary human and why he isn't afraid of her. Arthur looks her in the eye and points out that he wasn't afraid before, and he certainly isn't afraid now, especially since she's still wearing handcuffs. The ghost looks down at her wrists and panics, realizing she's still bound by the specialized spirit cuffs from the police. With her powers suppressed, she's practically defenseless. Arthur lets out a wicked grin and begins to slowly close the distance, looking very much like the Predator now. Seeing Arthur in this state, the ghost actually feels a chill run down her spine. As the saying goes, humans fear ghosts a little, but ghosts fear humans a lot, especially when the human is this aggressive. Don't come any closer, I'll scream. The ghost cries out nervously, while the female exorcist watches from a distance. She is utterly floored by the display, noting that she's never seen a ghost so terrified of a person. He's a real tough guy. Everyone take notes, Leo whispers. Meanwhile, Arthur lets out a dark, sinister chuckle, looking at the ghost with a predatory glint. Go ahead and scream, he says. The louder you scream, the more excited I get. He adds with a grin that it would be a shame if she didn't put up a fight. Seeing the situation, the ghost turns to flee, but Arthur lunges forward, thrusting his peachwood sword at her back. She barely dodges, realizing he's staying so close that she doesn't have a single opening to escape. Finally, she snaps in anger. Her tongue suddenly elongates, lashing out at him like a whip. Arthur quickly parries with his wooden sword, forcing her to retract it in fear. Curse you. If it weren't for these specialized handcuffs, I'd tear you apart, she hisses. Arthur just laughs, reminding her that she didn't exactly tear him apart when her hands were free, either. She tries to vanish into the night again while he's distracted, but Arthur isn't about to let $10,000 float away. He gives chase immediately. Although she's floating, she isn't particularly fast, especially with those spirit cuffs on, which seem to be blocking most of her supernatural abilities. Arthur accelerates, nearly catching her several times, while the interns follow behind to watch the show. He lets out another weird laugh as he runs, taunting her that she can't escape and that he's close enough to hit her just by throwing his sword. To be honest, he's actually starting to enjoy the chase. Keep running. This is getting interesting, he shouts. His words weigh heavy on the ghost's mind. She had already lost the battle of wills, and now this terrifying man is hunting her down while systematically breaking her psychological defenses. It's more than any spirit should have to endure. Finally, the ghost reaches her breaking point and begins to wail in despair. Arthur seizes the opening, lunging forward and tackling her from behind. They roll across the ground together until Arthur ends up pinned on top of her, his knees firmly on her stomach. One hand holds her down, while the other skillfully presses the broken sword against her throat. By the time the interns catch up, they find Arthur in a dominant, almost kingly pose, having completely subdued his prey. What happened? Did we miss the best part? Leo asks, clutching his chest in disappointment. The female exorcist sighs, certain that the struggle must have been spectacular. As for the ghost, she is currently in tears, sobbing about how terrifying humans are and how much she just wants to go back to her grave. She has completely collapsed under the pressure. If she had known she'd run into such a fierce predator tonight, she never would have left the house. She truly regrets not checking her horoscope before heading out. Arthur, on the other hand, is quite thrilled. Another $10,000 is practically in his pocket. He remarks to himself how easy this money is to earn, a comment that makes Leo and the other interns turn red with envy. It's a bit demoralizing, really. They couldn't even handle one ghost as a team, yet this man has caught the same one twice in a single night. They feel a deep sense of shame. If they knew Arthur didn't have a single drop of spiritual power in his body, they might actually go jump in a river out of embarrassment. Just then, the ghost seems to have an epiphany. With lightning speed, she reaches into Arthur's pocket, grabs his phone, and dials a number before he can react. The call connects almost instantly. Hello, 110? Is this the police? I'm the ghost who escaped earlier, but I've been caught again by this psychopathic bandit. Please come quickly. He's too scary, she cries, panting in terror. Arthur is stunned by this bizarre turn of events. He was planning to call the police anyway, but he never expected the ghost to turn herself in just to get away from him. Nearby, Leo and the interns are ready to worship Arthur as a god. They've never seen anyone bully a ghost into calling the cops on themselves. It's a real eye-opener, a truly unique experience that makes them feel like their outing tonight was worth every second. They all nod in silent, stunned agreement. It doesn't take long for the spiritual police van to arrive. The female officer from before is the first to jump out, and her eyes light up when she sees Arthur pinning the ghost to the ground. "It's you again," she exclaims, impressed that the ghost couldn't escape his grasp for long. Arthur looks up at her and smiles, explaining that he saw the ghost had escaped and couldn't let her continue her reign of terror, so he stepped in to suppress her. "You're truly a hero," she says, as the other officers move in to secure the prisoner. They quickly move to double-cuff the spirit. The ghost, looking somewhat mentally unstable now, begs the officers to take her away immediately. "What's the rush?" one officer asks. "Weren't you just trying to escape? Now you're in a hurry to go to jail." The ghost just snaps at them to shut up and take her away before Arthur does anything else. Arthur is still thinking about his reward, but he doesn't want to be too blunt about it. Instead, he asks how they let her escape in the first place, mentioning that he had to chase her for over a mile and engage in a fierce battle to bring her down. He's making it very clear that he put in a lot of effort. The female officer, however, misses his hint entirely. She explains that on their way back, they were ambushed by a red sedan incident. A ghost in a bridal gown kidnapped one of their officers, and by the time they caught up, the male officer had already had most of his life force drained away. The officer explains that the victim's life force won't recover for a decade. While she speaks, we see the captured ghost staring at Arthur with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. To be honest, she looks at him as if he's a natural disaster in human form. Realizing the officer isn't taking the hint, Arthur asks if there's a reward for catching an escaped prisoner. The officer confirms that every capture counts as a new reward. Arthur plays it cool, claiming the money doesn't matter, but the officer insists on handing over another $10,000. He accepts the cash with a look of mock reluctance. Not wanting to waste more time, he tells them to take the ghost away and keep a tighter leash on her this time. As they prepare the leg irons, Arthur whispers to the ghost to come find him if she ever escapes again. The ghost, utterly defeated, vows to stay in prison for the rest of her life. After the police van leaves, Arthur chuckles to himself. Earning $20,000 in one night by bullying a ghost is a fantastic business model. Leo and the interns are speechless. Arthur tells the interns that the secret is simply having no fear, then decides to call it a night. He's confident that even without magic, the right equipment makes this job a goldmine. But just as he turns to leave, a red bridal sedan, carried by 4 spirits, suddenly charges out of the shadows. In a flash, Arthur is snatched and pulled inside the carriage. The interns are paralyzed with fear. Leo pales, identifying the culprit as a high-level bride ghost in a red dress, and frantically tells the others to call the police immediately. Inside the red sedan, Arthur looks around and finds a ghost sitting beside him, her face hidden by a traditional red veil. "Is this some kind of cosplay?" he asks, completely unfazed. The ghost lets out an eerie laugh and suggests they spend their wedding night together. Arthur's eyes light up with excitement. He asks her to promise she isn't joking. The bride ghost is momentarily stunned. Usually, men scream, beg for mercy, or faint when she captures them to drain their life force. But this man seems genuinely thrilled. She wonders if he realizes she's a ghost, but when she tells him, he just shrugs and says he knows. Arthur is actually thinking about how lucky he is to find another reward. He figures he can enjoy the wedding night and then call the police to collect another $10,000. It's a win-win situation, or so he tells himself. Thinking of the prophet, he calls her baby and reaches out to lift her veil before she can even react. As the fabric rises, a breathtakingly beautiful face is revealed. She is a perfect beauty, though her complexion is deathly pale, which, in Arthur's eyes, only adds to her charm. The ghost is caught completely off guard by his boldness. She asks what he thinks he's doing, and Arthur reminds her that she was the one who suggested the wedding night. He accuses her of trying to back out of the deal. The ghost begins to suspect that Arthur might be a powerful hidden master. She can't imagine anyone else being this calm, let alone trying to flirt with a high-ranking spirit. Arthur, focused solely on the reward money he'll get after the wedding, tells her to stop stalling. He hates it when people, or ghosts, don't keep their word. The ghost explains that no man has ever dared to lift her veil before, let alone follow through. Arthur just gives a dark little laugh and tells her she simply hasn't met him yet. You're not getting cold feet, are you? Arthur challenges. The bride ghost snaps back, explaining that the veil and the wedding night are merely her methods for trapping victims to drain their life force. She admits she'd take his energy regardless, leading Arthur to point out the complete lack of logic in her ritual. To be honest, her professional process seems a bit redundant even to her. Arthur insists that since she set the stage for a wedding night, they should see it through. He accuses her of being unprofessional, arguing that a ghost should at least stick to her own script. He demands the full victim experience she promised. The bride ghost, now thoroughly confused, tries to argue that she only needs his energy, not his cooperation, but she's losing the debate. Arthur frowns, telling her that if he's giving up his life force, he at least deserves the promised experience. He mocks her lack of professional integrity, leaving her feeling quite insulted. The ghost tries to assert dominance, claiming she can do whatever she wants in her own carriage. Arthur isn't having it, telling her he won't tolerate her freeloading on his life force without a trade. He delivers an ultimatum. If she tries to force him, he'll simply end his own life and haunt her as a vengeful spirit. The bride ghost recoils, stunned by such a reckless threat. Arthur looks dead serious, and the ghost realizes she's in over her head. She figures if he's this arrogant as a living man, he'd be an absolute nightmare to deal with as a ghost. Faced with a man who fears neither ghosts nor death, she finally yields. She identifies herself as a high-ranking spirit from the East Mountain Cemetery and tries to politely end the encounter. Arthur introduces himself as prisoner 9527 from the local penitentiary. When she tells him he's free to go, he takes offense, asking if she thinks she can just kidnap him and discard him. The bride ghost panics as Arthur insists they proceed with the wedding night. She has never encountered a victim so difficult, especially one using self-destruction as a bargaining chip. She realizes that if he actually followed through on his threat, he'd transform into a high-level spirit instantly. Terrified of the consequences, she finds herself completely unable to force him. Her entire ghostly worldview is collapsing as she stares at him in disbelief. Arthur remains firm, telling her they are following her procedure to the letter, wedding night first, energy second. The bride ghost is practically in tears, begging him to just leave and forget the whole thing. Arthur, however, lectures her on the importance of honesty and integrity, even in the business of haunting. He makes himself comfortable in the carriage, telling her the clock is ticking. She apologizes profusely, begging for mercy, but Arthur is determined to teach this spirit a lesson in manners. She is trapped in a logical paradox of her own making. She can't take his energy by force, and she can't bring herself to go through with the wedding. Meanwhile, dawn is fast approaching. She realizes she has to return to the burial ground soon, but Arthur's stubbornness is an immovable force. Finally, she grits her teeth and agrees to his terms. Arthur acts as if he's doing her a favor, claiming he's teaching her a valuable life lesson about keeping one's word. After a significant amount of time passes, the ghost looks at him with a complicated expression. She asks for her promised energy, but Arthur cheekily argues about the technicalities of what he's already given. He eventually agrees to give her just a tiny taste. As she leans in to draw a breath of his life force, Arthur cuts her off after only a few seconds, keeping his end of the bargain, barely. After taking a couple of breaths of his energy, Arthur still feels a bit drowsy. The bride ghost is stunned, but she doesn't dare complain. Even if she's being shortchanged, she just wants to escape this terrifying man. However, Arthur clearly has no intention of leaving the carriage just yet. He looks at her and asks why she's so obsessed with draining men's life force. Her eyes darken as she explains she wants to become powerful, and she specifically targets men because she despises them. Arthur, ever the curious soul, asks her to tell her story, as he's always loved a good ghost story. He especially enjoys hearing them from the ghosts themselves. The bride ghost is displeased, but she eventually relents, explaining that she was once a wealthy young lady. On her wedding day, before her carriage even reached the groom's house, the man she had never met ran away with another woman. This left her, a refined lady, as a complete laughingstock. In her fury, she set fire to the carriage and burned herself alive, transforming into a vengeful spirit. Arthur frowns, telling her she was far too extreme. If he didn't want to marry her, she should have just found someone else. Then again, considering the era's rigid traditions, tragedies were perhaps inevitable. The bride ghost gives him a strange look, pointing out that he was just threatening to kill himself a moment ago, so he's hardly one to talk about being extreme. Arthur just gives a dark little chuckle and tells her to stop the carriage. She is overjoyed, thinking this nightmare of a man is finally getting out. With a wave of her hand, the four small spirits lower the carriage to the ground. Arthur takes a closer look and realizes these four aren't actual ghosts, but paper effigies. He asks her how many people she's drained, and she admits to dozens lately. He then asks if she realizes that what she's doing is actually illegal. The bride ghost is baffled, wondering what his point is. Arthur calmly pulls out his phone and dials a number. Hello, 110? I have a bride ghost here. After he hangs up, the ghost is absolutely livid, accusing him of turning on her the moment the wedding night was over by calling the police. Arthur scowls, reminding her that he is the victim here. He argues that just because he followed her ritual and let her take some energy doesn't mean he can't report a crime. He asks her if it would be fair if he kidnapped a woman, humiliated her, robbed her, and then told her she wasn't allowed to call the police afterward. The bride ghost is shaken. His logic, twisted as it is, seems impossible to refute. In her mind, she's the one who's been wronged. She calls him a rogue and a scoundrel, completely breaking down because she can't out-argue him. She doesn't have the moral high ground, and she's too afraid to use force. At this moment, she realizes that even being a ghost can feel incredibly helpless. Before long, police cars arrive and surround the carriage. From inside, the officers can hear the bride ghost screaming insults at Arthur, calling him a beast, a scoundrel, and a complete degenerate. A female spirit officer runs over and looks at Arthur, asking what on earth happened inside. She notes that the ghost seems to absolutely loathe him and wonders what he did to her. Arthur just sighs, noting that on his first day as a bandit, he ended up being the one kidnapped. He points out that she's the one who drained so many people, yet she's acting like the victim. The bride ghost glares at him, swearing she'll remember the name Arthur. She admits she's outnumbered now, but mocks the idea that these spirit officers can actually hold her. With a sudden shout, she bursts through the roof of the carriage. Ghost catching guns fire at the roof, deploying specialized nets that instantly ensnare her. The bride ghost screams in pain as white smoke rises from where the net touches her. However, she suddenly releases a massive burst of ghostly energy, and with a powerful surge, the nets snap and shatter into pieces. She laughs, telling them they're dreaming if they think they can catch her, before flying away into the night. As she disappears, she leaves behind a final warning. Arthur, the ghosts of the East Mountain burial grounds will not let this go. Arthur simply frowns, unimpressed by the display. To be honest, he finds these spirit officers rather useless. He practically handed her to them on a silver platter, and they still let her slip away. The female officer approaches him, asking if he's alright. He tells her he's fine, but remarks that their performance was a bit underwhelming. She explains that the ghost was exceptionally powerful and they didn't have any high-level experts on site. She warns Arthur to be careful, as the East Mountain faction is quite formidable. Since the bride ghost clearly holds a grudge, she will almost certainly return with reinforcements to deal with him. Arthur acknowledges the warning, but shows no fear. The female officer, whose name is Luna, is deeply impressed by his fearless courage. As they introduce themselves, Arthur realizes their names are a bit of a coincidence. Then the captain of the spirit police walks over with a grin, introducing himself as Captain Midnight. After saying his goodbyes to the officers, Arthur heads home alone. The next morning, he returns to the incense shop from the day before to stock up on gear. However, the short-haired girl behind the counter sees him and immediately tells him they're out of $5 items and he should look elsewhere. Arthur is speechless. He asks if she has any manuals for practicing Taoist arts. She offers him a basic Taoist techniques book for $5,000. When Arthur actually pulls out the cash, her attitude pulls a complete 180-degree turn, and she politely hands him the secret manual. She suddenly becomes the perfect hostess, asking if her valued customer needs anything else. Arthur tells her he'll think about it later and heads home to study the book. He returns to his old apartment, ready to see what kind of power he can unlock. As darkness falls over his rented room, Arthur suddenly snaps his eyes open. A flash of green light flickers in his pupils, signaling that he has already mastered the energy. It was so simple that he wonders if he's a once-in-a-century genius. After practicing for a while longer, he feels a comfortable surge of true energy gathering in his core. It feels as though he can manifest this power at will. Now that he's officially entered the world of cultivation, he heads back to the temple shop. He asks if they have any other secret manuals for Taoist arts. The short-haired girl looks at him with utter disbelief, reminding him he just bought the introductory one this morning. She tells him she's studied that manual for years without success, yet here he is claiming to be done in half a day. She keeps her skepticism to herself, however, and pulls out another book. This is the Encyclopedia of Taoist Arts, covering talismans, incantations, and hand seals. The price is steep at $15,000, but after a bit of haggling, they settle on $13,000. Arthur pays up, though he immediately suspects he overpaid. Back at his apartment, he dives into the encyclopedia, studying late into the night before taking a deep breath. He's learned several talisman drawings, incantations, and hand seals. He figures he's finally a bandit with actual technical skills. Since it's the middle of the night, he decides to head out, find a ghost to deal with, and perhaps collect a little bounty money. But first, he needs a proper tool. He searches the room and finds nothing but a rusty watermelon knife. Undeterred, he follows the instructions, channeling his true energy through a tissue to carve runes onto both sides of the blade. As the energy hits the metal, glowing lines begin to etch themselves into the rust. A moment later, a complete divine weapon talisman appears on the blade. To finish the job, he pricks his finger and drops 2 beads of blood onto the runes. He recites the activation spell, calling upon the heavens and the earth to awaken the hidden power within the steel. As the final words of the command leave his lips, the talismans on the knife flash with a brilliant light. Arthur is drenched in sweat, realizing that creating a magical artifact is exhausting work. He grips his new weapon and heads out. After all, he has a reputation as the Midnight Bandit to uphold. The streets are as deserted as ever. After walking for 2 blocks, he finally spots 3 ghosts, one with a long, trailing tongue, one with a knife buried in his chest, and another with a bullet hole in his forehead. To be honest, none of them look like particularly good spirits. Arthur grips his knife and follows them, planning a sneak attack from behind. However, he pauses when he hears the long-tongued ghost speak. The spirit asks his friends if they've heard about the human bandit in the city who specifically targets ghosts for kidnapping. The others chime in, noting how terrifying and aggressive this bandit is, apparently turning ghosts in for bounty money. The news has spread through the local ghost circles, and they warn each other to be careful. Arthur frowns, steps out, and blocks their path with his knife, demanding to know more about this rival. He asks them who this bandit is and why someone is trying to steal his business. The 3 ghosts jump in fright. The hanging ghost looks Arthur up and down, noting his fierce expression, and nervously asks who he is. Arthur points his watermelon knife at them with a menacing grin. He tells them his identity isn't important, but the fact that he's kidnapping them for bounty money certainly is. He also demands to know the name of this other bandit, as he won't tolerate any competition in his territory. The 3 ghosts immediately grow tense, looking at each other in realization. One of them asks if there's a possibility that the bandit they were talking about is actually him. Arthur pauses, repeating the question back to them. The long-tongued ghost nods, saying he has a very strong feeling about it, and the other 2 ghosts quickly agree. Arthur tells them not to go off feelings and asks for actual evidence, lest there be a misunderstanding. The ghost with the knife in his chest mentions that the bandit's nickname is the Midnight Bandit. Arthur blinks, realizing that yes, that is indeed him. The 3 ghosts share a nervous, knowing laugh. Arthur nods, relieved that no one is actually competing with him for work. The ghosts, thinking the tension has passed, ask if they are free to leave. Arthur's smile vanishes instantly. He glares at them, asking why on earth they think they can leave now that they know he's the bandit. The 3 ghosts suddenly have a moment of clarity, realizing their situation has gone from bad to worse. Arthur slowly draws his watermelon knife, letting out a low, eerie chuckle. He tells them they have the right to remain silent, but anything they say can and will be used against them. He invites them to resist if they think they can handle his blade. As he swings the knife, the 2 divine talismans emit a power that strikes pure terror into the spirits. They are completely stunned. This really is the legendary Midnight Bandit they've heard so much about. They realize he's the terrifying man who sent 2 ghosts to jail in a single night, the one even the bride ghost feared. They beg him not to hurt them, asking what he wants from them. The ghost with the bullet hole joins in, desperately pleading for mercy as they await their fate. Going to jail? That doesn't bother them at all. Arthur is momentarily stunned by how cooperative they are, which, to be honest, makes things a bit boring. He tells them they shouldn't be so honest. They are ghosts, after all, and should at least try to resist or fight back. The 3 ghosts shake their heads in unison, insisting there's no need for that. They are perfectly happy to be captured without a fight. They've heard the rumors about last night, specifically how the female ghost he kidnapped ended up having a complete mental breakdown after reaching the station. The mere thought of it is enough to terrify any spirit, so they have no intention of resisting. But Arthur isn't having it. He spent all day practicing Taoist arts, and even crafted a magical watermelon knife. He can't just let all that hard work go to waste without a proper test run. He's determined to see if his cultivation actually works. He looks at the trio and tells them that being kidnapped without a struggle is simply too unfair and humiliating for them. He's practically begging for a challenge, which is a rather strange position for a bounty hunter to be in. The ghosts insist that being kidnapped by him is their own fault, and they accept their fate. One of them even produces a rope, urging Arthur to tie them up immediately because they simply can't wait to be in custody. Arthur, however, remains firm. He won't tie them up unless they fight back. But the ghosts refuse to cooperate with his desire for combat. They take the hanging ghost's rope and wrap it around themselves, tying the 3 of them together in a neat little bundle. Arthur is utterly baffled. This definitely wasn't how he pictured his first professional exorcism going. But is he the type to give up so easily? Of course not. Frowning, he accuses the 3 ghosts of insulting him just now. They stare at him in shock, swearing they did no such thing, but Arthur insists with absolute authority that he heard them loud and clear. He declares that if he says they insulted him, then they did, and now they must face the consequences. With a swift move, he slices through the rope binding them. The ghost with the knife in his chest realizes the truth. Arthur just wants an excuse to beat them up. Arthur steps forward with his blade, denying the accusation even as he swings the watermelon knife. This finally snaps the hanging ghost's patience. Thinking they are being bullied too far, he lashes out with his long, spirit-infused tongue, swinging it like a whip toward Arthur. Arthur gives a dark chuckle, channeling his energy into his left hand to catch the flying tongue midair. He remarks that such a long tongue must make talking difficult and offers to perform a little surgery. With a flash of his knife, he severs a section of the ghostly appendage. The remaining tongue snaps back as the ghost falls to the ground in agony. Arthur's eyes light up. His enchanted knife really can inflict serious damage on spirits. Just then, the knife-chested ghost lunges forward, his fingers extending into long, black claws aimed straight for Arthur. Arthur meets the attack with a backhand swing, cleanly shearing off the ghost's claws and sending him flying. The ghost with the bullet hole, terrified to get close, exhales a cloud of ghostly energy. Arthur channels his remaining energy into the blade, preparing for a final strike. Empowered by his energy and the divine runes, the knife glows faintly as it cleaves through the ghostly mist. The residual light strikes the bullet hole ghost, sending him tumbling back with a scream. All three spirits are now a complete mess, struggling to scramble back to their feet. They look at each other and reach a unanimous conclusion. They are indeed very easy to bully. They turn to flee, but Arthur just laughs and asks where they think they're going. Hearing this, they immediately stop in their tracks, ready to surrender for the second time. Arthur quickly corrects them, telling them they have to keep running or the game isn't fun anymore. The ghosts are practically in tears now, wondering what is wrong with this man. It's suddenly very clear why the previous ghosts he caught suffered complete mental breakdowns. Unable to take the torment any longer, the ghosts snatch a phone from a passerby and dial the emergency line. They claim to be drunkards and beg the police to come and arrest them immediately. The spiritual police arrive quickly, and the ghosts practically crawl to them, begging for handcuffs. They confess to every minor scare and bad deed they've ever committed, desperate to be locked away from Arthur. The officers are confused by such eager confessions, but Arthur doesn't mind. He walks away with another $30,000 in bounty money, feeling quite good about his earnings. However, when he returns home full of joy, he notices something chilling. There is a bright red, bloody handprint on his door. Even more concerning are the words written all around it, warning him about the consequences of offending the bride ghost. As Arthur stands there talking to himself about the strange message, the mystery behind the graffiti begins to reveal itself. Not far away, two ghosts slowly emerge from the shadows, bickering about the quality of their work. One ghost complains that he told the other not to write so much nonsense, as they've run out of space on the door. The ghost holding the brush defends himself, claiming he simply wanted to show off his literary culture. It seems Arthur has some new, rather eccentric visitors. The ghost mutters that he thought Arthur would understand it was a declaration of war. He adds a final stroke to the door, then turns to Arthur and tells him to look closely. It is officially a challenge. Having finished their masterpiece, the two ghosts don't waste a single second. They turn to leave, but Arthur immediately shouts for them to stop, asking who gave them permission to doodle on his door. The two ghosts are stunned by his sudden outburst. They ask if he's blind, explaining they are from the East Mountain Cemetery and were sent by their boss. Arthur mocks them, asking if their boss thinks he's some kind of underworld kingpin or a street thug, then orders them to scrub the door clean. The ghosts are indignant, reminding him they are spirits and that he's in big trouble. Yet here he is, acting like he's the one in charge. As the two ghosts try to walk away, Arthur pulls his watermelon knife from his waist and charges straight at them. The ghost holding the brush sneers, thinking Arthur is a joke and claiming he'll torture him to death tonight. He takes a deep breath, and his ghostly head begins to swell. With a powerful exhale, he sends a howling gale of energy toward Arthur. Our hero simply snorts, tightens his grip on the knife, and channels his energy into a single downward strike. The oncoming wind is instantly sliced in two, flowing harmlessly past him on both sides. The ghost, realizing Arthur has some skill, decides to try a different approach and lunges with a ghostly claw that extends unnaturally toward him. Arthur swings his blade with a sharp whistle, and the ghost screams as his extended hand is severed, dissolving into a cloud of black mist. Arthur steps forward and kicks the injured ghost aside, while the other ghost retreats in terror before lashing out with his own claws. Arthur's watermelon knife cleaves through the air, shattering the waves of ghostly energy. In the blink of an eye, he is standing right in front of the trembling spirit. The ghost nervously hides his hands behind his back, begging Arthur not to come any closer and reminding him of his affiliation with the cemetery. Arthur just laughs, telling him that even if he served the king of hell himself, he'd still get a beating for ruining a perfectly good door. He threatens to turn them into ash if they don't clean the door immediately, though, to be honest, he'd much rather turn them into cash. To Arthur, these aren't just ghosts, they are walking paychecks. Seeing his sheer ruthlessness, the two spirits don't dare to argue further. With long faces, they walk back to the door and begin scrubbing away their hard work. Once the door is clean, they look at Arthur, hoping they are finished. But Arthur just points toward his messy apartment and tells them to clean the inside as well. The ghosts are stunned, protesting that they haven't even stepped inside yet, so they couldn't have made the mess. Arthur calmly explains that he didn't say they made it. He's just telling them to clean it. At this point, the two ghosts look like they are about to burst into tears. They came here to deliver a grand challenge, but instead, they were mocked, beaten, forced to clean a door, and are now being exploited as free labor. It's a situation that would make any demon weep, but they realize they have no choice. Arthur watches them work, noting that their attention to detail is a bit lacking. Eventually, one ghost announces that the house is clean and asks if they can finally leave. Arthur tells them to wait a moment, as he's arranged for someone to come and pick them up. The ghosts are actually touched, thinking it's quite polite of him to arrange a ride. Arthur pulls out his phone and dials the spiritual police, telling them he has 2 more ghosts ready for pickup. He hangs up and tells the spirits not to worry, their ride is on the way. For a brief moment, the ghosts actually think Arthur might not be such a bad guy after all. Before long, a police car pulls up and a female officer named Luna steps out with several colleagues and $20,000 in bounty money. She praises Arthur for his incredible efficiency. It's at this exact moment that the 2 ghosts realize they've been played. They ask in a daze if they are being sent to jail, and Arthur sarcastically asks if they expected a trip to a university instead. Luna doesn't waste any time loading them into the car. As they are driven away, the ghosts glare at Arthur, reminding him not to forget the challenge at the cemetery tomorrow night. They warn him that their boss and the bride ghost will be waiting. Arthur just smiles, thinking only a fool would actually show up for that. But as the police car disappears, a red bridal sedan chair floats into view. Inside is the furious bride ghost, and sitting beside her is a terrified Sophie. Sophie looks at Arthur with pleading eyes as the bride ghost delivers a chilling ultimatum. She is taking the girl to the East Mountain Cemetery, and if Arthur doesn't show up tomorrow night, Sophie dies. With a final, wicked laugh, the red sedan chair vanishes into the night sky. Arthur's expression instantly darkens. It seems he'll be visiting that cemetery after all. He pulls out his phone and calls Luna, asking her to get him some explosives. The more, the better, and telling her that money is no object. He has a very specific plan for his upcoming visit. Luna agrees immediately, not even bothering to ask why he needs enough firepower to level a small hill. She knows better than to question Arthur when he's in this kind of mood. And so, our hero prepares for a confrontation that is sure to be anything but quiet. Despite her professionalism, Luna can't help but ask why Arthur needs so many explosives. He simply gives a cold laugh, declaring he's going to level the East Mountain Cemetery and show those spirits exactly what happens when they threaten him. Luna is left completely stunned by the sheer audacity of the plan. Using explosives to fight ghosts. It's a strategy so simple, yet so extreme, that no one had ever dared to think of it before. Luna notes that the cemetery's declaration of war has already spread through the city's supernatural circles, likely because the ghosts wanted to build up their own terrifying reputation. They want to expand their influence, it seems, and these spirits certainly know how to play the crowd. Arthur scans the horizon with a chilling smile, muttering that he won't even give them the chance to feel regret. With that, he pulls a shovel from the car and begins his work. Under the scorching sun, we see him slowly walking across the burial grounds, digging deep pits, and burying crate after crate of gunpowder. Once everything is set, he finds a quiet spot to sit cross-legged and meditate. Time ticks away, and as the sun begins to set, the atmosphere shifts. Several cars arrive, carrying not just the spiritual police, but a news reporter as well. She addresses the camera, explaining that they are live at the scene following the news of the Ghost's challenge against the mysterious cultivator. The stakes, it seems, have just become public. The reporter explains they are broadcasting under the protection of the authorities as the duel approaches. As darkness falls, a biting wind begins to howl, and the air grows thick with ghostly energy. Arthur slowly stands up, reaching behind his back for his trusty watermelon knife. He lets out a thunderous shout, calling for the clowns of the cemetery to come out and take their beating. That roar echoes across the city, shocking everyone watching. Usually, these ghosts are the ones doing the intimidating, and even the police tend to avoid this place unless absolutely necessary. But today, someone has arrived who doesn't fear them at all, someone who actually showed up to the fight. To the observers, this looks like a suicide mission. Right on cue, the Een energy in the cemetery intensifies tenfold, and shadows begin to flicker among the trees. Before long, hundreds of hideous and terrifying spirits emerge from the darkness surrounding the area. Seeing this massive horde, the officers stationed in the distance begin to look a bit pale. It is a daunting sight, to say the least. It's like a few ordinary officers facing a massive mob. They can handle one-on-one, but the sheer numbers are overwhelming. Arthur looks at the hundreds of ghosts and casually remarks that for a famous cemetery, the quality of the spirits is surprisingly poor. Not a single one looks impressive. The moment those words leave his mouth, the entire cemetery falls into a deathly, terrifying silence. It's as if he's intentionally poking at an old wound. After all, the spirits buried in a place like this usually have tragic backstories, and Arthur isn't just being rude, he's being cruel. It's like he's rubbing salt into their scars and then asking if it hurts. Naturally, every ghost present is instantly enraged, and any hope for a peaceful resolution vanishes. Just as the mob prepares to lunge, a red bridal sedan chair floats through the air and lands gracefully on the ground. The bride ghost steps out, glaring at Arthur with pure hatred. Beside her, Sophie is still tied up. She looks terrified but thankfully unharmed. The bride ghost sneers, asking if he really dared to show up. Arthur just laughs, asking if she's forgotten how tough he can be. The bride ghost turns red with fury, telling him to prepare for death. Arthur, never one to miss a chance to provoke, suggests that she's only obsessed with him because of what happened in the sedan chair. He jokes that she clearly can't live without him and wants him dead just so he can stay with her forever. He speaks with a suggestive tone that leaves the audience completely bewildered, wondering what scandalous secrets might be hidden between them. On the live stream, the comment section explodes. Viewers are stunned, calling Arthur a legend for seemingly having a history with a high-ranking ghost. People are comparing him to the legendary heroes of old who weren't afraid to romance the supernatural. Meanwhile, the bride ghost is absolutely livid. She spits out a curse, promising to tear his soul into pieces so small that he won't even be able to exist as a ghost. She asks him if he thinks he can still win against such an army. Arthur's eyes grow cold as he realizes the talking is over. The bride ghost screams for her minions to attack, demanding they shred his soul, so he never gets the chance to return as a spirit. She knows that if a man as ruthless as Arthur becomes a ghost, he would be more terrifying than anything currently in the cemetery. He has to be erased completely. Following her command, the hundreds of restless spirits surge forward all at once, a sight that makes the watching police tremble with fear. Yet, we see Arthur standing there with total composure. He tightens his grip on his knife and calmly offers them one last chance. He tells them to release the girl and apologize, and he might just pretend none of this ever happened. To the ghosts, he sounds like a madman. Here he is, one man against 100 spirits, yet he's the one making demands as if the odds were reversed. Naturally, the ghostly horde doesn't listen. They simply keep charging, unaware of the trap waiting beneath their feet. Ignoring his warning, the spirits surge forward, and Arthur simply smiles, realizing he'll have to earn his paycheck tonight. He reaches into his pocket, fingers finding the detonator, and with a few quick presses, a series of terrifying explosions rock the East Mountain Cemetery. The center of the burial mound erupts in a sequence of blasts, sending clouds of dust and ancient, withered bones flying into the air. Many of those remains are instantly pulverized by the sheer force of the gunpowder. The ghosts are frozen in shock and terror, turning their heads in unison to stare at Arthur in disbelief. They never imagined, even in their wildest dreams, that this man would launch a literal physical assault on their very foundations, leaving the bride ghost completely stunned in her sedan chair. It seems Arthur isn't following the traditional rules of a supernatural duel at all. He's here to blow up their graves. He gives a dark chuckle, asking if they're having fun yet, and casually mentions he has 10 more detonators just like this one. The spirits are utterly bewildered by his unorthodox tactics, staring at him as if he were the true monster in this scene. To use explosives against ghosts is, to be honest, a level of cruelty that even these restless souls find hard to comprehend. The horde is at a complete loss, knowing that if their remains are destroyed, their very souls will suffer the consequences. Amidst the confusion, an old spirit with long white hair and a powerful aura steps forward, clearly the one in charge of this desolate place. The old ghost admits that in all his years, he's never seen anyone use bombs to fight the dead, leaving them entirely unprepared. Arthur just scoffs, asking who he is, only for the spirit to declare himself the master of the cemetery. The white-haired elder points to the bride ghost, explaining she is his granddaughter, which explains why the whole cemetery was mobilized for her vendetta. Arthur, however, isn't interested in family trees. He's busy preparing to level the rest of the grounds. Worried about the remaining graves, the old ghost quickly calls for a ceasefire, suggesting that while Arthur insulted his granddaughter, there is still room for a compromise. He proposes that they both take a step back, provided Arthur kneels and apologizes. He claims this would show the cemetery's generosity and settle the matter once and for all. Arthur simply stares at him in a heavy, suffocating silence, a look that begins to make even the powerful old spirit feel a bit uneasy. The old man tries to speak again, but he's interrupted by a massive explosion as Arthur detonates another crate. The blast tears a huge crater into the earth, scattering dust and bone fragments and causing several ghosts to flicker as their physical anchors are damaged. The spirits are terrified, the police are speechless, and the live stream is overflowing with comments praising Arthur's absolute audacity. Seeing the destruction, the old ghost panics, desperately shouting for Arthur to stop being so impulsive so they can talk. Arthur mocks the idea of a discussion, asking why on earth he would kneel when he's the one with the explosives. It's an absurd situation. The ghosts are acting like they have him surrounded, when in reality, he's the one holding them hostage. The old ghost quickly changes his tune, saying an apology without kneeling would suffice, but he's answered by yet another deafening blast. The explosion sends the spirits into a frantic state of panic. Without a word of negotiation, Arthur calmly presses the buttons on 2 more detonators in quick succession. Dust fills the air as the spirits scatter in a chaotic frenzy, and the old ghost is now beyond desperate, offering to apologize to Arthur instead. He begs him to stop the bombing, even offering to have the ghosts kneel to him, but the explosions continue. A blast goes off right beneath the old ghost's feet, obliterating his own remains and causing his spiritual form to waver violently. A rapid-fire series of explosions follows, effectively leveling the entire cemetery and leaving it a smoking ruin. The air is a thick, choking mixture of ghostly energy, gunpowder smoke, and dust. Over 100 spirits stand among the craters, looking weakened and miserable as the destruction of their bones leaves their souls in a state of constant, agonizing instability. Even the white-haired elder is trembling, his form flickering as he glares at Arthur with murderous rage, swearing that he won't let him leave this place alive. In response, Arthur simply draws his trusty watermelon knife. He notes calmly that since their souls are already fractured and wounded, they really shouldn't be making such empty threats. It is a cold observation, and one that suggests the real fight is only just beginning. Arthur charges forward with a dark grin, gripping his watermelon knife as he slashes at the first spirit to reach him. Sparks fly upon impact, and the ghost lets out a wretched scream as a deep gash opens across its form, leaking spiritual energy as Arthur continues his relentless assault. He swings the blade repeatedly, striking every spirit that dares to draw near. If a traditional priest were fighting these weakened ghosts with spells, it would be an exhausting ordeal, but for Arthur, using a physical blade makes it feel like nothing more than a simple workout. The spirits, their foundations already shattered by the explosions, seem utterly drained of strength as they lunge toward him with desperate, feeble movements. This isn't so much a supernatural battle as it is a one-sided brawl, and Arthur is making it look incredibly easy. Watching the stream, Mike swallows hard, realizing he's witnessing a brand new way to handle the undead, a true masterclass in audacity from the legendary Arthur. Back at the burial mound, the ghosts are losing their nerve as their physical remains lie in ruins, leaving their souls fragile and weak. Even when they manage to swarm him, their attacks lack the power to cause any real harm, while Arthur's blade, enhanced by divine runes, is far more than they can handle. He's a busy man, after all, taking down ghosts one by one until more than half the horde is incapacitated. With his knife in hand and his energy focused, he carves a path from the eastern slope to the western ridge without so much as blinking. And to be honest, his eyes don't feel dry at all. Soon, countless spirits are sprawled across the ground in agony, suffering from both the explosions and their fresh blade wounds. Even the white-haired elder, driven to a frenzy, nearly loses an arm when he tries to charge Arthur in a fit of rage. The old spirit was once a formidable power, but with his skeletal remains destroyed, he is now pathetically weak. After being wounded by Arthur's blade, he collapses onto the ground, weeping in sheer frustration and pain. The air is filled with miserable wails as not a single spirit is spared from injury, and as the thick smoke finally begins to dissipate, a single figure is revealed. It's Arthur, still holding his knife and breathing heavily from the exertion, muttering to himself that this was actually quite tiring. Nearby, the police officers are nearly fainting. The man just took down 100 ghosts by himself, and his only complaint is that he's a bit sleepy. Arthur then walks over to the red sedan chair, where the bride ghost sits, completely paralyzed by fear. She knew he was strong, but she never imagined he was this much of a monster. She hasn't been this terrified since she encountered a legendary Taoist master a century ago. As the bride ghost stares blankly, perhaps from shock or simple disbelief, Arthur ignores her entirely. He reaches into the carriage and pulls Sophie out, who blinks her large eyes in a daze, struggling to process the chaos. It's hard for her to believe he caused such a massive scene just to save her, which, in its own strange way, feels more romantic than arriving on a golden cloud. While Sophie is lost in her emotions, Arthur turns his gaze back to the bride ghost inside the sedan chair. The ghost looks back at him with a deeply complex expression, and after a long, heavy silence, Arthur speaks with a voice full of profound sentiment. He tells her that before he met her, he never could have imagined such a thing, a beginning that immediately sets a very dramatic tone. The bride ghost's heart trembles, expecting a moment of genuine emotion as Arthur looks up at the sky at a dramatic 45-degree angle. He continues, saying he never thought he'd find someone who actually made rules just to let people take advantage of them for free. The ghost's face stiffens and her body begins to tremble, that comment cut deeper than any blade. Arthur sighs, shaking his head, and adds that there was something else he truly didn't expect, giving the ghost a tiny flicker of hope for a plot twist. However, he simply finishes by saying he never expected to get a cash bonus on top of a free encounter. The bride ghost lets out a desperate, soul-shattering shriek, calling him a piece of trash as her spirit is utterly crushed by his words. Arthur just chuckles and turns to leave. He considers the night a success, having dealt a heavy blow to the local supernatural underworld. As he walks, he mutters to himself about the sizable bonus he's earned, while Sophie looks at him in disbelief, realizing he was thinking about money the whole time. Arthur calmly corrects her, noting he came for the bonus and saved her as a side quest, causing Sophie's expression to freeze. She quickly recovers with a grin, declaring that since he saved her, she's going to stick to him for the rest of her life, which makes Arthur frown. He turns back to the battered group of ghosts and asks if they'd like to take her back after all. Before Sophie can even get scared, the ghosts scramble away in a panic. They've had their home blown up and their souls slashed once, and they aren't about to risk a second round. After making sure this wasn't some kind of elaborate sting operation, Arthur leaves the burial mound under the fearful gazes of the spirits and approaches the spiritual police, where a dozen officers are looking at him with pure admiration. One female officer, Sarah, can't wait to speak, telling him that he dealt a massive blow to the ghosts tonight. She promises to apply for a bonus of at least $100,000 for him, explaining that since not all the spirits were evil, some won't be arrested. Their current state is punishment enough. On the surface, Arthur remains calm, but inside, he is absolutely thrilled. It seems tonight's brawl was well worth the effort, so he tells them it's no trouble at all and leaves the cleanup to the professionals. But he isn't quite finished yet. He warns the remaining spirits that they had better come to his door and apologize in person or else, and with that final threat, he saunters away. The ghosts are fuming, but not a single one dares to speak up as we see Arthur preparing to head out the next evening, watermelon knife in hand, ready for another heist. However, as he opens his door, he freezes. Standing outside is a massive crowd of over 100 lonely spirits, all kneeling in the dirt. These are the ghosts from the Eastern burial mound, including the white-haired elder and the bride ghost, and every single one of them looks completely defeated. It's clear these spirits have realized the gravity of their situation. Heaven only knows what Arthur would do to them if they didn't show up to apologize. In the face of absolute violence and a man who fights like a crazed bandit, they have no choice but to bow, while behind them, a line of police cars sits waiting. Quite a few officers are watching Arthur with awe, and they aren't alone. Nearby, a crowd of Taoists, monks, and exorcists has gathered to witness the spectacle. Since they missed the action last night, they weren't about to miss the sight of 100 ghosts kneeling in apology. Everyone is deeply impressed by the scene. After all, making this many ghosts apologize is a rare tale in the supernatural circles of the city. Arthur stands with his hands behind his back and coolly asks the spirits why the police haven't locked them up yet, noting that it seems a bit unusual. He suggests they should at least be charged with participating in a gang fight, which makes the white-haired elder think to himself that it wasn't a fight so much as a one-sided beating. The elder explains that they've already been processed and will all face jail time, but they were given one chance to come here first. Arthur finally remembers his demand from the night before and, satisfied with their attitude, tells them they can leave. The spirits stand up and obediently file into the police vans, though the bride ghost gives Arthur one last look filled with lingering terror. Once the ghosts are hauled away, Sarah approaches and hands him a bank card containing $500,000, his reward for clearing out the burial mound. Arthur takes the money, and having done this enough times now, he doesn't even bother to act surprised as Sarah passes on a message from her chief. The chief hopes he will keep up the good work, and Arthur nods, claiming he's just about to head out and maintain world peace again. Sarah smiles, noting that he's become quite famous now, with the nickname, the Bandit of the Night, spreading through the city's supernatural community. Arthur wonders aloud if a man chasing ghosts down the street with a watermelon knife might create a bad image, and Sarah admits he might have a point. He tells her to get back to work while he goes to find more ghosts to tidy up, and as she leaves to start her patrol, the professional mask finally slips. A massive grin breaks across Arthur's face. He knew hunting ghosts was profitable, but $500,000 in one go is more than he'd make in years at a regular factory. At this rate, he's determined to keep going until he reaches the absolute peak of success. But just as he's daydreaming about his bright future, a shrill, high-pitched voice rings out, addressing him as young man. Arthur looks around in confusion, wondering who on earth is talking to him, until the voice tells him to look down. He looks down and sees a strange animal staring up at him with wide, bulging eyes. Startled, Arthur blurs out a question asking what kind of cat has a neck that long, which causes the creature's face to twist into a very human expression of annoyance. The creature opens its mouth and speaks in a perfect human tongue, indignantly asking who he's calling a cat. It reveals itself to be a weasel, though Arthur notes it's his first time seeing one that looks so much like a feline. The weasel tells him he must answer a question, and Arthur agrees, beckoning the creature to come a little closer. The weasel takes a few steps forward, wondering why on earth this human wants him to stand so near. Usually, when the elders of his tribe go out to seek a spiritual blessing from humans, even powerful cultivators are terrified and try to avoid them. And yet, this man isn't running away. In fact, he doesn't seem afraid at all, even encouraging the weasel to approach. Sensing that something is off, the weasel finally asks his question, beginning with "Do I look like?" But Arthur cuts him off. Arthur insists that the creature answer one of his questions first, leaving the weasel stunned by this sudden reversal of the rules. Arthur shakes his head, insisting that he goes first, otherwise, he won't answer a single thing. The weasel, feeling insulted, asks if Arthur is drunk and demands he look closer to see that he's a great immortal, but Arthur simply threatens to walk away if the creature won't play by his rules. Arthur turns back and asks the creature if he looks more like a good man or a bandit. The weasel studies him carefully and admits that, to be honest, Arthur's vibe is definitely more bandit. Arthur nods in satisfaction, but when the weasel tries to ask his own question, Arthur stops him again. He asks if the spiritual police have a policy for giving out rewards for catching monsters and demons. The weasel thinks it over seriously and assumes there must be a bounty, which makes Arthur smile, though the creature has no idea just how much trouble he is in yet. The weasel is still confused as to why Arthur is asking such strange, seemingly random questions. Little does he know, in Arthur's eyes, he has already transitioned from a spiritual entity to a walking paycheck. The creature innocently asks again, "Do I look like a human or a god?" Arthur gives a dark little chuckle and tells the creature he looks like a walking $10,000 bill. Before the weasel can even process that, Arthur lunges forward, pointing his watermelon knife at the creature's throat and declaring that he is now officially under kidnapping. He warns the creature not to resist, or the blade will do the talking. The weasel stares up with wide, bewildered eyes, asking why on earth he's being kidnapped. Arthur simply points out that since the weasel already labeled him a bandit, kidnapping is just part of the job description. The creature is outraged, stammering that he is a great immortal and shouldn't be treated this way. Arthur couldn't care less what he is. He tells the weasel to shut up and start walking, or things will get very cold very fast. The weasel is left in a state of absolute, trembling shock. He mutters that this isn't how he imagined things going at all. Usually, humans are supposed to be terrified and beg for mercy when he appears, but it seems the elders in his tribe might have exaggerated how easy it is to get a blessing. Apparently, the human world is far more dangerous than he thought. The weasel decides the city is too full of tricks, and he wants to go back to the countryside. Arthur, however, is feeling a bit of a thrill. After all, this is his first time kidnapping a monster. He tells the creature to relax and take a breath while they head to their destination. The weasel nervously asks where he's being taken, worried that he might be sold or have his organs harvested. Arthur tells him he's overthinking it. Nobody would want to buy a weasel anyway. The creature points out that his fur is actually quite valuable, which is a fair point, really. Arthur leaves him speechless by promising not to skin him or take his fur. The weasel then wonders if he's being taken to a sweatshop, having heard horror stories about factories that make employees work 18 hours a day without pay. It's a vivid imagination, to say the least. The thought of being trapped in a dark workshop tightening screws forever makes the weasel's fur stand on end. Arthur tells him to stop making things up and explains that he's simply taking him to jail. To the weasel, this news lands like a literal bolt of lightning. Arthur has no interest in more chatter and leads the creature straight to the spiritual police station. An officer steps forward, immediately going on high alert when he sees the weasel. Arthur calmly explains that he's brought in a monster to collect the reward. The officer looks at him with newfound respect and asks if he is the famous bandit of the night, Arthur. Arthur gives a modest smile, calling it just a nickname, and the officer quickly calls for Sarah, explaining that she is the one who handles his cases now. Sarah arrives quickly, calling Arthur her idol and noting that they only just parted ways before he caught another one. The weasel, trembling, tries to defend himself, pleading with them not to throw a great immortal into a prison cell. Sarah asks what crimes the creature has committed so she can fill out the paperwork. Arthur turns to the weasel and barks at him to confess his sins. The startled creature stammers that he hasn't actually done anything wrong, not a single thing. Arthur isn't buying it, suggesting that surely he's cursed someone, urinated in public, or stolen a child's lollipop. He doesn't want his hard-earned bounty to vanish just because the monster is too well-behaved. However, the weasel insists he's innocent of all those things. Arthur looks at him with total disbelief, asking how an animal could claim he's never relieved himself in public. The weasel indignantly explains that the village at the foot of his mountain has a public restroom, and he even makes sure to wash his hands afterward. Arthur's eyes widen as he realizes the monsters in these mountains are surprisingly civilized. He begins to panic, wondering what will happen to his reward if the creature truly hasn't done anything wrong. He catches Sarah looking at him strangely and realizes how he must sound. He clears his throat awkwardly, claiming he just doesn't want people to think he's arresting innocent spirits just for the money. The weasel, now on the verge of tears, looks at him with a face full of pure, unadulterated grievance. And who could blame him, really? It was, to be honest, a bit of an awkward moment. Arthur realized that arresting such a civilized monster meant there was no real legal ground to throw him in a cell. Marcus, the officer, decided it was time to interrogate the weasel to see if he truly was as innocent as he claimed. Marcus looked the creature in the eye and asked where he had been staying before coming to the city. The weasel explained he'd been living on East Mountain, only venturing down to the village to use the public restroom, and otherwise never leaving the wilderness. When asked if he had ever harmed a human, the weasel looked genuinely offended, claiming he'd barely even seen a person before arriving here. Marcus found himself at a loss. Usually, there's a trail of chaos behind a monster, but this one seemed perfectly law-abiding. Marcus turned to Arthur and admitted that without a crime, they couldn't exactly process an arrest. Arthur felt a wave of helplessness. He couldn't very well force the creature into a cell if he hadn't broken the law, so he reluctantly conceded that he might have made a mistake. Marcus assured Arthur that he admired his dedication to clearing the streets of monsters, but urged him not to rush things. Arthur sighed, deciding to call it a night and head back out to see if any actual trouble was brewing elsewhere. As Arthur walked away, Marcus gave the weasel a friendly smile, telling him he was free to go. However, he added a stern warning. If the creature ever did turn to a life of crime, he would be right back in that station, especially if he tried any supernatural tricks. He specifically warned the weasel against using the blessing ritual to threaten or manipulate humans, as that would lead to immediate disaster. The weasel froze, realizing the complexity of his situation. If a human called him a man, his spiritual progress would be ruined. If they called him a god, they'd have to worship him, which usually led to conflict when they inevitably refused. It dawned on the weasel that simply trying to get a blessing from a human was almost guaranteed to land him in legal trouble. He truly didn't know what to do anymore. Reality was proving to be far more difficult than the stories he'd heard back home. Other weasels had told him that getting a blessing was easy and led to a life of luxury and worship, but for him, it had only led to a kidnapping and a near miss with a prison cell. He wondered why his luck was so much worse than the others, and as the weight of his misfortune hit him, he couldn't help but burst into tears. Marcus was taken aback, watching the little creature sob, and asked what on earth was wrong. "I'm just so pathetic," the weasel wailed. The weasel turned and dejectedly shuffled away, but a few moments later, he spotted Arthur up ahead and hurried to catch up. Arthur sensed he was being followed and turned around, asking what the creature wanted now. The weasel admitted he had nowhere else to go and asked for shelter. Arthur scoffed, pointing out that he was busy trying to earn enough money to support himself, let alone a supernatural pet. He asked if the weasel expected to eat and drink for free, but the creature quickly promised he could help Arthur earn money in return. Arthur paused, wondering if the weasel meant selling his fur, but the creature shook his head and insisted he could get a job. He mentioned a friend of his, a fox spirit, who was already living in the city and earning a living, and she had told him to find her if he ever visited. Arthur asked why he didn't just go find his friend then, but the weasel explained that he wanted to become a true immortal. To do that, he needed a human to grant him a blessing and set up a shrine for him, and he wanted Arthur to be that person. Arthur clarified the request. The weasel wanted him to set up a shrine, offer him food and drink, and bow to him 3 times a day. The weasel's eyes lit up with excitement, nodding eagerly as if this were a perfectly reasonable arrangement. In response, Arthur slowly pulled out his watermelon knife, looking at the creature with a murderous glint in his eye. He asked if the weasel really wanted to try that plan, causing the creature to gulp and immediately backpedal, saying the shrine and the bowing weren't strictly necessary. The weasel stammered that he was only joking about the worship, but when he tried to bring up the shrine again, Arthur told him to stop dreaming and get lost. He had no time for these games, but the weasel wasn't ready to give up just yet. He insisted again that he could help Arthur make money, knowing that since the police had banned him from using his powers on people, Arthur was his only hope. Arthur hesitated. If the creature really could bring in some cash, taking him in might not be the worst idea. He asked what kind of work his fox spirit friend did to earn so much money, and the weasel innocently replied that she raised chickens. Arthur's eyes widened in disbelief. He knew exactly what that was usually code for in the city, and it wasn't farming. He couldn't believe his ears, realizing that what he thought was an inspiring story of a monster working hard was actually something much more scandalous. He told himself that even for a fox spirit, there had to be more dignified ways to make a living in the human world. The weasel explained that his friend couldn't earn much, as she only knew how to raise chickens, and he planned to learn the trade from her. Arthur was speechless, lamenting how far monster society had fallen. Then a thought occurred to him. If humans doing this was illegal, surely it was illegal for monsters too. He decided to track down this fox spirit, confiscate her earnings, and turn her in for a reward. We see the weasel happily leading the way to a shop in a secluded alley. Arthur took a deep breath, telling himself this was about justice and stopping such blatant corruption, not just the money. After walking through several streets, they finally reached the alley where the fox spirit lived. Arthur scanned the area with a judgmental huff, convinced that such a place couldn't possibly be up to any good. Just then, a girl with a perfect figure and fox-ear hair accessories appeared, walking toward them while counting a small handful of change. Even without seeing her face, her appearance was undeniably striking. He overheard her whispering happily about earning $320 after a long day of hard work. Arthur was shocked that such a beautiful creature would work so hard for such a small sum. He wondered if the industry had really fallen on such hard times, but he felt no pity for her. Stepping forward with a stern expression, he barked at the girl to stop right where she was. The fox spirit, whom we'll call Luna, looked startled and politely explained she was closed for the day. Arthur glared, pulling out his knife to show he wasn't there for whatever services she offered. He stepped forward, pressing the blade toward her and snatching the $300 from her hands. He declared the money confiscated, leaving poor Luna standing there with her hands trembling in confusion. She looked at him with tearful eyes, asking why he was stealing her money. Arthur remained aggressive, telling her that ill-gotten gains deserved to be taken, which only made her cry harder at the blatant robbery. Arthur scoffed, asking if she expected him to be kind to a criminal. The weasel rushed over, frantic and confused, asking why Arthur was pointing a knife at his friend and taking her hard-earned cash. When Arthur explained it was because she raised chickens, the weasel was stunned to learn that such a thing was illegal. He began to think the human world had far too many complicated and restrictive rules. Luna protested, demanding to know why she was being treated like a criminal. When Arthur asked what she did for a living, she proudly stated she ran a chicken shop, which only made him more suspicious. Determined to gather evidence before calling the police this time, Arthur demanded she take him to her shop. They arrived at the storefront, but as soon as he stepped inside, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. Inside the shop stood a glass rotisserie filled with dozens of marinated chickens ready for roasting. There were pots of stewed chicken and basins of fried chicken everywhere. It was, quite literally, a shop that sold chicken. Arthur swallowed hard, realizing his massive mistake, and awkwardly asked if she really just cooked poultry. Luna and the weasel stared at him in total confusion, wondering what on earth he had been thinking. He felt a wave of intense shame, realizing these two monsters were far more innocent than he had assumed. He quickly returned the money, muttering that the whole thing had been a very big misunderstanding. Luna simply smiled and accepted the apology, which made Arthur wonder if all monsters were this naive. She didn't even press him for an explanation, seemingly happy to just let the matter drop. She turned to the weasel, asking why he hadn't taken a human form yet. He explained he was following the path of spiritual blessings, which required a human's help, and that was why he had come down the mountain. Luna looked at Arthur, asking if he was the one providing the shrine and offerings. The weasel sighed sadly, complaining that Arthur refused to help him, while Arthur simply rolled his eyes at the request. The weasel explained that he'd give Arthur all his earnings in exchange for a shrine. Arthur paused, then offered to take him in, provided the monster paid rent, utilities, and living expenses. The weasel was stunned, wondering who was serving whom if he had to pay for everything. Seeing this, Luna suggested Arthur simply let the weasel work for him instead, but Arthur just scoffed. He asked if they even knew what he did for a living. When Luna shook her head, he proudly declared himself the Midnight Bandit, a man who spends his nights kidnapping wicked monsters and spirits. Luna just pouted in confusion, having never heard of him. Arthur's ego took a hit. He was sure he'd become famous lately, but Luna insisted the only big news she'd seen involved a local farm. Arthur stood with his hands on his hips, acting tough and assuming she meant his exploits. Instead, she explained that a massive poisoning at a chicken farm was causing poultry prices to skyrocket. She worried her costs would rise tomorrow, then asked if he was involved. Arthur awkwardly dropped his hands, realizing they weren't on the same page, but Luna kindly offered him some fried chicken. He accepted, and by the time he finished tasting her cooking, it was midnight. He was eager to get back to hunting, and the weasel, having nowhere else to go, was determined to follow him. Arthur didn't agree immediately, thinking he could use a monster lackey if the weasel proved reliable. He decided to test if this new companion could actually bring him any value or profit. He told the weasel that if he wanted to follow, he had to work. Luna, having closed her shop, followed them out of curiosity and asked what exactly Arthur planned to do with her friend. Arthur replied that they were going to commit robbery. Of course, what else would a bandit do? Luna looked worried until he clarified he only targeted monsters who were actually doing evil. Relieved, she watched as they set off. Soon, they spotted a strange figure hopping along the street. Arthur asked what it was, and the weasel identified it as a jiangshi, a hopping vampire. The weasel noted they were common in the mountains, but rare in the city. Arthur's eyes lit up with greed, wondering if the creature's tomb might be filled with valuable ancient antiques. He chased after the figure and barked at it to stop. The creature turned around, revealing itself to be a female vampire who seemed genuinely surprised that a human was bold enough to confront her. She bared her fangs, hoping to scare him off, but Arthur didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out a large cleaver and charged straight at her, catching the poor vampire completely off guard. She panicked as the blade was pressed against her throat before she could even react. Though she doubted a normal knife could truly hurt her, Arthur's sheer intensity kept her from moving a muscle. He scolded her for lurking around the city at night, instead of staying in her tomb. The vampire was startled by his aggression and explained in a raspy voice that she was just looking for blood. Arthur mocked her, asking if she expected to just find a puddle of blood lying on the ground. She clarified that she wasn't looking for a puddle, she was looking for a person to provide it. He declared her a criminal and announced she was under arrest. He gave her a choice: face justice immediately, or lead him to her tomb and surrender all her treasures for a lighter sentence. The vampire insisted she wasn't hurting anyone, but Arthur didn't believe a word of it. How could someone hunting for blood at night claim to be innocent? She struggled to explain her methods. She claimed she only took a little blood without harming anyone's life. To Arthur's absolute shock, she pulled out a large, stained medical syringe, proving this wasn't her first time collecting. So, instead of biting, she uses this contraption to siphon blood. She claimed it was to avoid killing, hoping to talk her way out of trouble if the authorities ever caught her. Arthur stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief at such a creative, if slightly horrifying, loophole. But in Arthur's eyes, this was still unacceptable. He asked if her victims even consented, and more importantly, when she last changed that needle. He lectured her on hygiene, asking who would be responsible if she started spreading diseases through her collection methods. These were valid concerns, and not something a vampire could simply ignore. The girl looked at her syringe and admitted she didn't have the money for a new one. Arthur pointed out that using old needles was still illegal, leaving her to wonder what he actually wanted from her. He repeated his demand, take him to her tomb, hand over the treasures, and then go to jail. She asked what the point of surrendering was if she ended up behind bars anyway. Arthur's logic was simple. If she cooperated, she wouldn't get beaten up first. The vampire scoffed, refusing to be threatened or lead him to her resting place. She challenged him, thinking she could win a fight. Arthur just gave a dark, chilling laugh. A minute later, he was wiping his blade as the vampire scrambled up, suddenly very polite and ready to lead the way. A quick lesson in manners had made her much more cooperative. She began leading our group toward her tomb, her traditional robes marking her as someone from the Qing dynasty. Arthur figured that while items from that era weren't always priceless, they were certainly worth a look. We follow them deep into the mountains on the outskirts of the city. The night woods are usually crawling with dangerous spirits, but Arthur didn't feel a hint of fear. To be honest, with a weasel and a fox spirit by his side, the monsters were the ones who should have been worried. Deep in the hills, the vampire stopped at a spot with excellent feng shui. She led them to a hidden tunnel, explaining it was a path left behind by grave robbers. She crawled in first, and Arthur followed closely behind, eager to see what lay within. The tomb was modest, lacking even a proper hallway. The entrance led straight into the main burial chamber. Inside, an open coffin sat surrounded by various funeral offerings. Arthur frowned, unimpressed by the meager collection of antiques, but the vampire nervously pointed toward the coffin. She insisted there were gold and silver treasures hidden inside. Arthur stepped forward to investigate, and sure enough, he spotted several pieces of gold and silver. He promptly stuffed everything into his pockets. The vampire cautiously asked if they were even now, but Arthur wasn't finished. He reminded her that siphoning blood with unsanitary equipment wasn't something she could just walk away from by paying a small fine. She asked what else he could possibly want, and he mentioned turning her in to the police for a $10,000 bounty. He claimed it was for public safety, but the vampire wasn't buying it. She realized he wasn't a hero. He was just looking for a double payday. She called him a bandit for taking her treasures and then trying to sell her for a reward. Arthur took offense, claiming he was a midnight bandit, which apparently made all the difference. He told her to stop complaining and start moving, but the vampire was desperate. She asked how much the bounty was, and when he said 10,000, she pulled out one last piece of gold. She was hoping for a private settlement. Arthur went quiet for a moment, considering the offer, before telling her there would be conditions. The first condition was that she could no longer go around siphoning blood from strangers. The vampire was confused, wondering what she was supposed to drink. She pointed out that she didn't owe him anything since he'd already cleaned out her tomb, but she quickly sensed his mood shifting. Sensing danger, she immediately backed down and asked how she was supposed to survive. Arthur suggested she go to a hospital and buy medical waste blood. When she complained about having no money, he pointed to Luna, the fox spirit, as a model of self-sufficiency. He noted that Luna worked hard and made hundreds of dollars a day at her shop. Luna blushed, modestly downplaying her success. The vampire sighed, admitting she had no idea how to make money. When asked what skills she had, she could only answer that she was good at drinking blood. Arthur sighed, frustrated that she seemed to have no other talents whatsoever. That's when the weasel spoke up, suggesting that Arthur take her in and let her work for him. Arthur turned a sharp, angry gaze toward the little monster. He reminded the weasel that he hadn't even agreed to take him in yet, let alone a vampire. He asked what use he had for her. His house wasn't a blood bank, after all. The weasel shrunk back, weakly arguing that everyone has value, especially since Luna had proven she could run a successful shop. And why should anything be impossible? To be honest, the weasel's suggestion actually sparked a new idea in Arthur. If he was already acting as a midnight bandit, he might as well expand his influence. After all, it's much easier to make money with a crew. He turned toward the vampire girl with a sudden, calculating smile. He took the gold piece from her hand and told her she wasn't entirely useless. He offered her a job with a regular salary, which left her confused about what her duties would be. Arthur explained she'd be his subordinate, helping with collections and perhaps working in one of the businesses he planned to open. With hundreds of thousands already in his pocket, he felt a new sense of confidence. While hunting monsters for bounties was profitable, he knew that running a proper business was the real path to wealth. If he ever opened a shop or a factory, having a vampire on the payroll would certainly be a unique advantage. As he stood there, a grander plan for the future began to take shape in his mind. The vampire, practical as ever, asked exactly how much she would be paid. Arthur waved it off, promising a few thousand a month, enough to buy plenty of blood, though she'd have to check the current hospital rates for that. The vampire fell silent for a moment before finally agreeing to the deal. Satisfied, Arthur nodded and began the trek back to the city. And so, our group returned. Arthur leading his two new supernatural employees and his ever-loyal admirer, Luna the fox spirit. However, just as they reached the city limits, Arthur spotted something suspicious by a nearby pond. A water ghost was attempting to drag a young girl into the depths. His eyes lit up. It seemed business was booming tonight. He charged forward, shouting for the spirit to let the girl go. He had been feeling quite unlucky lately, having encountered 3 monsters in a row who hadn't committed crimes serious enough for a police bounty. He'd even ended up hiring 2 of them. But here, finally, was a ghost caught in the act of harming a human, an opportunity he wasn't about to let slip away. The ghost jumped at his thunderous shout, turning to see a handsome man charging at her with a massive watermelon knife. She froze in confusion for a split second before snarling back. She told him to mind his own business, threatening to kill him for interrupting her search for a scapegoat replacement. Hearing her mention a scapegoat only made Arthur more excited. In the world of spirits, that meant she intended to kill someone to take her place in the afterlife. That was a serious offense, one that would definitely earn her a long prison sentence, or perhaps even total erasure if she succeeded. Arthur shouted that she could find her replacement in a jail cell as he accelerated his pace. The water ghost, now filled with murderous intent, lunged out of the water toward him. She clearly thought this human was a fool for challenging a spirit with nothing but a common kitchen blade. But as she flew through the air, she finally noticed the three figures standing behind him. There was a hopping vampire, a weasel walking upright like a man, and a young girl with fox ears. This bizarre entourage made Arthur look far more terrifying than a lone swordsman ever could. The ghost was clever enough to realize she was outmatched, even ignoring the man with the knife. The combined power of a vampire, a fox spirit, and a weasel demon was more than she could handle. Despite being a spirit herself, she had never seen such a diverse and intimidating group of monsters. Terrified, she spun around and dove back toward the pond, hoping to make a quick escape. Arthur, naturally, had no intention of letting his bounty swim away. He pushed his speed to the limit, focusing his inner energy and channeling it directly into the steel of his blade. He swung the knife with a powerful strike, sending a faint arc of blade light whistling toward the ghost's back. It was only then that she realized she was facing a true cultivator. In a panic, she whipped around and threw up a wall of ghostly energy to block the incoming attack. The impact was deafening. Although she managed to block the light, the force of the blow sent a shudder through her very soul, slamming her onto the muddy bank. Desperate, she grabbed the unconscious girl's leg and began dragging her toward the water, determined to take a life no matter what. Arthur lunged forward, leaping with all his might to reach them. At the very last second before the girl disappeared into the dark water, he managed to grab her hand. He gripped her tightly, shouting for her to hold on and not let go. The ghost poked her head above the surface, glaring at him with icy malice. She suggested that if he loved playing the hero so much, he should just come down into the depths and join her. She yanked harder on the girl's leg, causing the poor victim to scream out in agonizing pain. Arthur refused to loosen his grip, knowing that if he let go, the girl was as good as dead. He turned and barked an order to the three standing idly behind him, asking why they were just watching. Luna was the first to react, her long legs propelling her into a graceful mid-air flip. She landed beside Arthur and immediately swung her hand, unleashing a bolt of red spiritual energy into the water. However, the ghost was fast, darting beneath the surface while keeping her claws locked onto the girl's leg. She didn't care if the girl died from the struggle. A corpse in the water served her purpose just as well. That was when Jacob, the weasel, finally joined the fray. He scurried forward, his sharp claws extending as he prepared to intervene. It was a chaotic tug-of-war between the living and the dead, with a young girl's life hanging precariously in the balance. Jacob's claws grew longer as he swiped at the water ghost, but she dodged again, letting out a wicked laugh. She boasted that as a water spirit, she was invincible beneath the surface and that they couldn't touch her. Our vampire girl then leaped forward, extending her own claws to help. She grabbed the victim's hand and gestured for Arthur to deal with the ghost while she held the girl secure. Arthur nodded and dove straight into the water, brandishing his blade to stab at the spirit. He told her he didn't believe in her invincibility and was here to test it himself. The ghost hadn't expected him to be reckless enough to fight her in her own element. As she hesitated, Arthur swung his blade at her hands. Having seen the weapon's power before, she didn't dare take the hit and was forced to release her grip. Once she let go, the vampire pulled the girl toward safety. The ghost tried to trap Arthur beneath the surface, but he didn't hold back, swinging his watermelon knife with a desperate, life-or-death intensity. Seeing his fierce momentum, the water ghost actually became cautious, feeling a bit intimidated by his sheer aggression. However, after a few wild swings, Arthur suddenly turned around and scrambled out of the pond back onto the shore. The ghost was left utterly bewildered in the water. Once on land, Arthur stretched his arms, complaining that moving underwater was far too exhausting before calling out to the spirit. He told her he wasn't an idiot and had no intention of fighting her in the water where she had the advantage. He offered her one chance to crawl out, but the ghost, now furious, retorted that she wasn't stupid either and challenged him to try and do something about it while she stayed put. Arthur glared back, telling her she'd soon see exactly what he could do. He turned to the vampire girl and told her to follow him home to fetch a water pump. After instructing Luna and Jacob to keep a close eye on the pond, he turned and left with his undead employee. When they returned, the vampire was carrying a heavy industrial water pump on her shoulders, hopping along effortlessly despite the weight. They reached the pond, but the water ghost still hadn't realized the gravity of the situation, watching them with a mix of confusion and arrogance. She saw the vampire set down the heavy iron machine, but had no idea what it was for. She continued to mock Arthur, asking if he'd finally thought of a way to fight her and daring him to come back into the water to see what would happen. Arthur let out a cold laugh, telling the ghost that whether one is human or spirit, it's best not to be too arrogant and burn all your bridges. The ghost laughed hysterically in response, taunting him to come into the water and teach her a lesson if he was so capable. She asked if he was angry and if he desperately wanted to scatter her soul, mocking the fact that he seemingly couldn't reach her. Arthur didn't waste any more words. He set the pump on the bank and tossed the intake hose into the center of the pond. He ran the discharge hose out toward a large nearby lawn where the soil could easily absorb the runoff. Once everything was ready, he cranked the diesel engine to life. It was a powerful machine, and as it began to roar, the water ghost's expression shifted from mockery to pure confusion. She clearly hadn't expected such an unconventional tactic, and the atmosphere grew heavy with the sound of the engine. For the next half hour, the ghost watched in silence as the water level dropped rapidly, eventually leaving her only waist-deep in the shrinking pool. Another 20 minutes passed, and the pond was nearly gone. Only a small puddle remained where the ghost stood, but Arthur walked over with the hose and, ignoring her stunned expression, proceeded to suck up the very last of the water around her feet. He even produced a mop from somewhere and began drying the mud beneath her feet until there wasn't a drop left. The ghost stared at him in total shock. He had been utterly thorough, leaving her no escape. At this point, she was starting to deeply regret offending him. With the pond bed now completely dry, Arthur looked at her. The ghost spoke up nervously, admitting that perhaps she had been a bit too loud while she was in the water, but insisting there was no need to pump the whole place dry. To be honest, she had already lost her nerve halfway through. She looked on the verge of a breakdown as she spoke. Arthur stared at her, repeating her claim that she was only a bit loud. She began to apologize profusely, begging him not to take her previous behavior to heart and offering a sincere apology for any offense caused. Arthur told her it was too late for apologies because he was officially annoyed. He reached out, grabbed the ghost by her hair, and pinned her to the dry ground. He began channeling his inner energy into his fist, letting out a sharp shout as he prepared to strike. His massive, energy-infused fists rained down on the ghost, who was so psychologically broken she didn't even try to resist, only letting out pained screams. This scene left Jacob the Weasel in shock and the vampire girl shaking her head in disbelief at Arthur's ruthlessness. They finally realized just how terrifying their new boss could be. After a long while, when the ghost could no longer even muster a scream, Arthur finally let her go and tossed her aside. He pulled out his phone and made a call, reporting his location at the park. "Hey, Silas, get over here. I've got a water ghost causing trouble." After hanging up, Arthur watched as the spirit slowly crawled up from the dry ground, her eyes filled with a mix of terror, despair, and utter disbelief. A short while later, a police car pulled up into the night. Silas arrived with two paranormal officers in tow, rushing toward them. "Master Arthur," Silas greeted him, before looking around in surprise. "Wait, why is the weasel here? And this vampire girl? Which one is the water ghost?" Arthur explained that Jacob and the vampire were both working for him now. "She's the ghost," Arthur said, nodding toward the shivering spirit before pointing to the girl they had rescued. "And she's the victim." The girl immediately chimed in, explaining how the ghost had tried to drag her into the depths. Silas looked around the barren pond bed, looking quite confused. "Where's the water?" At the mention of water, the ghost let out a manic, hysterical laugh. "Water? Where's the water? He pumped it all dry. You want water? I'm a water ghost, and even I don't have any water." Silas frowned at the clearly broken spirit, asking her what on earth was wrong with her. "What's wrong? My water is gone. He sucked it all away," she shrieked, stumbling toward Silas. "Do you have water? Do you have a lot? Give me some." Silas didn't hesitate. He pulled out his handcuffs and snapped them onto her wrists. Soon, the rambling, broken ghost was being hauled away into the back of the car. Silas handed Arthur a reward, remarking that he seemed to have driven the poor ghost completely insane. Arthur was honestly a bit speechless. Were ghosts these days really that fragile? After a brief exchange of professional pleasantries, Silas departed, leaving Arthur alone with his new undead employee. He was actually quite satisfied with her performance tonight. "Grab the water pump and follow me back," he told her, before turning to Jacob. "You did all right too. I'll take you both in for now to work for me." Jacob was thrilled, and even Luna the fox spirit felt a sense of relief for him. "Remember the golden rule of working for me. We make money," Arthur declared. "In this day and age, cash is king. Our only goal is profit." Both the weasel and the vampire nodded in agreement. The vampire, in particular, knew exactly what she needed, and it wasn't cheap. Buying blood required a significant amount of money, and without it, she'd go hungry. "If the work is as simple as tonight," she said, "then I have no problem with that." Arthur smiled, pleased with her high level of awareness. "Good, then let's call it a night and head home." Arthur led the vampire and the weasel back to his place, while Luna headed off to her own home. Once they arrived, Arthur cleared out a wardrobe for the vampire to rest in. She told him she didn't need to lie down. As long as she had a place to stand, she was perfectly fine. The wardrobe was a perfect fit. Just then, Jacob the weasel scurried over. "So, about that shrine you promised me, how do we set it up?" "Usually, it's a small table, an incense burner, and a piece of paper on the wall with my title on it. It's quite simple, really, Arthur replied. Wait, if you know how to do it, why don't you do it yourself? Jacob froze. To be honest, he had never heard of a spirit setting up their own shrine. That's not how it works. No spirit makes their own. Arthur just shrugged. Well, you can be the first. I'm letting you live here, aren't I? Do you expect me to wait on you hand and foot too? Arthur grumbled. Left with no choice, Jacob found a small table in the corner and taped a piece of paper to the wall behind it. He pulled out a ballpoint pen and began to write in shaky, crooked characters. He wrote, Shrine of Jacob II, Guardian Spirit of the East Mountain. Arthur ignored the weasel and went to bed, while Jacob finished his DIY shrine and smiled. It was a slightly tragic sight, really, the first spirit in history forced to canonize himself. Jacob blinked his large eyes, wondering if this even counted as a real shrine, but at least he had a place to call his own. He eventually settled in to rest, but the vampire girl was growing restless. After all, vampires are nocturnal creatures, and she was bored out of her mind. Unable to stay still, she quietly slipped out of the house and onto the streets for some fresh air. As she wandered, she noticed a ghost nearby, hovering outside the houses and moving from door to door. She wasn't quite sure what he was up to, so she curiously hopped closer. As she approached, she heard the ghost muttering a nursery rhyme to himself as he pointed at the doors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, catch a tiger by his toe. If he hollers, let him go. Yes, this house. He reached out to knock on the door. Suddenly, the vampire's voice rang out behind him. Hey, what are you doing? The ghost jumped nearly out of his skin. He turned around and jumped again when he saw her. A vampire? You scared the life out of me. I'm not doing anything wrong. Then why are you here? She asked. I'm a knocking ghost, he explained. I was just picking a door to knock on so I could haunt someone. But I have terrible indecision. I've been trying to choose a house for an hour. The vampire's eyes lit up. This was a gift delivered right to her. Why struggle to choose? I'll take you to a great one, she offered. The knocking ghost happily followed her back to Arthur's house. Without a second thought, he began to pound on the door. A moment later, a very annoyed Arthur threw the door open, shouting, Who the hell is it? Don't you people sleep? Arthur glared at the knocking ghost with such fury that the spirit froze in its tracks. Behind him, the vampire girl whispered that this was a dangerous spirit, but the ghost quickly regained its bravado, declaring that Arthur was simply unlucky to be his next victim. Arthur realized immediately that the vampire had brought him a gift, so he broke into a wide smile and invited the ghost inside. The knocking ghost was stunned by the hospitality. It felt wrong, somehow, but Arthur just urged him to stop standing around and come in. It was rare to have a guest, even a ghostly one, so Arthur kept up the pressure until the confused spirit stepped through the door. The ghost wondered if this man simply didn't realize he was a spirit, or if he was just putting on a brave face to cope with the terror. To prove his identity, the ghost spun his head a full 360 degrees on his neck, expecting a scream of horror. Instead, Arthur simply started clapping, praising the performance as if he were watching a particularly impressive street magician. The ghost was now utterly bewildered, and as soon as he was fully inside, the vampire girl stepped in and shut the door behind them. She stood there like a silent sentry, blocking the exit, which made the already nervous spirit feel even more out of his depth. Arthur pulled out a chair for the ghost, who by now had completely forgotten he was there to haunt anyone. Before he could process the situation, Jacob the weasel walked over on his hind legs, balancing a cup of tea in his paws and setting it on the table. The ghost's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he realized the weasel was talking, and he shrieked in terror at the sight of a monster. It was a bit ironic, really. The ghost who was supposed to be doing the scaring was now the one trembling and looking for an escape. When he saw the vampire still blocking the door, the knocking ghost finally realized the gravity of his situation. He had been lured into a trap, and it seemed the man, the vampire, and the talking weasel were all working together against him. Trembling, the ghost asked what they wanted, but Arthur told him to relax and simply asked about his professional business. The ghost explained that he picks a house and knocks. If they open, they die, and if they don't open, well, they die anyway. Arthur asked if he had actually succeeded in killing anyone before, and when the ghost confirmed it, Arthur looked strangely relieved. The ghost wondered why that mattered, but when he tried to leave, Arthur gave him a cold smile that suggested he wasn't going anywhere. Arthur told him to show off his skills, but the ghost was too confused to move, so Arthur sat down and invited the spirit to try and haunt him. The ghost, sensing the danger, claimed he didn't want to hurt anyone anymore and started backing toward the door. He realized things were going south, but before he could reach the exit, the vampire girl bared her fangs and hissed at him to go back. She insisted that he should at least try to haunt Arthur, leaving the poor ghost feeling utterly desperate and trapped. Arthur grew impatient with the ghost's hesitation and told him to just get on with it already. The ghost tried to compose himself, asking if he would truly be allowed to leave if he successfully haunted him, and Arthur gave him a reassuring nod. Seeing no other way out, the ghost gathered his courage and his ghostly energy, lunging at Arthur with a scream of, "I'll kill you." He aimed to strike directly at Arthur's chest, but at the very last second, his survival instincts kicked in and he hesitated. He pulled back his power, using only a tiny fraction of his energy to give Arthur's chest a light, chilly tap. It was a clever move, meant to satisfy the requirement without causing real harm, but it was exactly the opening Arthur had been waiting for. Suddenly, Arthur acted as if he'd been hit by a freight train, throwing himself backward onto the floor with an exaggerated cry of murder. He shouted for the vampire and the weasel to seize the ghost, and the spirit realized with horror that he'd been framed. The knocking ghost tried to flee, knowing that staying would lead to something far worse, and he transformed into a cloud of mist to fly away. However, the vampire girl was faster, striking him with a burst of energy that forced him back into his physical form. Realizing he couldn't run, the ghost roared in anger, deciding that if he was going down, he would take the leader with him. He summoned a swarm of spectral skulls and sent them flying toward Arthur, hoping to end the fight by taking out the man in charge. Arthur prepared to defend himself, but Jacob the Weasel leaped into action, swiping his paws to dissipate the skulls with a wave of energy. Arthur laughed, drawing his large blade and declaring that he was going to deliver justice to this murderous spirit. As Arthur charged forward with his blade, the ghost desperately threw out waves of energy to stop him. Arthur sliced through the spectral attacks with ease, closing the distance in seconds before swinging his weapon down toward the terrified spirit. As the knocking ghost rushed to defend himself, Arthur suddenly pulled back his blade and delivered a brutal kick to the spirit's lower half. The ghost was utterly stunned. This was hardly following the rules of a duel, and as Arthur swung his machete again, the spirit saw his foot twitch once more. The ghost sneered internally, deciding to ignore the blade and block the kick he was sure was coming. Instead, Arthur didn't kick at all. He brought the blade down, sending the ghost flying across the room. As he scrambled up from the floor, the poor spirit was nearly in tears, wondering what kind of person he had encountered. Realizing he couldn't win this fight, the ghost gave up on Arthur and lunged toward the exit, hoping to push past Luna, the vampire girl. But Luna was ready, standing firm at the door as a dark, chilling energy erupted from her body, and she began swinging her arms to drive him back. The sheer force of her energy kept the ghost at bay, leaving him with no chance of escape through the front door. With Arthur and Jacob the Weasel closing in from behind, the ghost began to panic. He couldn't run, and he certainly couldn't fight. It was a bit of a predicament, really. For a moment, the spirit had no idea what to do, but in a fit of desperation, he suddenly dropped to his knees. The sight even caught Arthur off guard, who watched in confusion as the ghost begged for mercy, pleading that if he had offended them, they should show the greatness of their hearts and let him go. The ghost claimed he didn't even remember offending them, but Arthur just gave him an amused smile. He reminded the spirit that he had just tried to kill him, and without another word, Arthur pulled out a red rope and smeared a drop of his own blood onto it to seal its power. He tied the knocking ghost up tightly before picking up the phone to make a call. He told the contact on the other end that he had caught a dangerous spirit responsible for several deaths, and to come pick him up. By now, the ghost was starting to lose his mind, muttering about Arthur calling the police. The ghost rambled that this wasn't just a trap, but a full-blown sting operation. Soon, a captain named Mike arrived with several spiritual officers, confirming that this ghost was indeed linked to multiple incidents. As they dragged him toward the car, the spirit struggled and shouted like a madman. Despite his frantic cries, he couldn't escape his fate and was locked inside the police van. Mike handed Arthur a reward of $10,000 and offered a few words of praise before leaving. The next morning, after waking up, Arthur began to ponder how he could earn even more money. To be honest, simply hunting monsters for bounties didn't feel like a sustainable long-term plan. Especially now that he had a vampire and a magical weasel as subordinates, it felt like a waste of resources not to do something bigger. He thought for a long time, but no brilliant ideas came to mind. That was when Sophie called him. When he answered, her voice sounded a bit strained as she explained that she'd had a massive argument with her father over her recent kidnapping. She had decided to leave home and start her own business without her father's help. She asked if Arthur wanted to join her, which made him laugh out loud. He told her he wasn't a fool. She was a rich heiress playing at work, while he actually needed to earn a living. But Sophie insisted she was serious about working hard and making something of herself. She explained that since her father started with a factory, she wanted to open one too, though she had no idea what to produce. Arthur was about to tell her to give it up and hang up, but then he paused. A factory didn't actually sound like a bad idea, so he suggested they open a clothing factory. In a sudden flash of inspiration, or perhaps a momentary lapse in judgment, a wild plan formed in his mind. The next time he caught an evil spirit, he wouldn't turn them in for a bounty immediately. He would put them to work for him first, without pay, of course, and only turn them in once they were no longer useful. He could even hire normal ghosts and pay them in spirit money, which cost him next to nothing. It was a plan for pure profit, and the thought of it made his eyes light up. To be perfectly honest, it was a stroke of genius, or at least a very profitable kind of madness. As a man who lived by his wits, he knew that to truly make money, he had to squeeze every bit of value out of these supernatural beings. And so, a new and rather unusual business venture was born.